Jump back in. What was I talking about? I can't remember now. Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of our brand new podcast, Talking Lab Live! We are your hosts. I'm Lucy, the founder and director of Talking Lab.
And I'm Sophie, and I joined Talking Lab in June 2023. We are independent, neurodivergent affirming speech and language therapists, but first and foremost, we were friends.
And we are absolutely obsessed with communication. We love to talk about it all the time, and we really wanted to share our enthusiasm for the topic with the general public, give people an insight into what speech and language therapists do, and learn some more about different types of communication ourselves. In this episode of Talking Lab Live, we're talking all about Helen Keller, an inspirational deaf-blind woman from Alabama who in the late 1800s learned to communicate by being taught American Sign Language and went on to be able to read, write and even speak. In our communication check-in, we're talking about Sophie's hectic week delivering speech and language therapy support to families and schools throughout Hampshire and Dorset, and how I'm coping with the 4-month sleep regression with my newest addition. In our Talking Lab Love segment, we're raving about Little Bear Baby Signing, which offers fun and interactive classes for parents to learn to sign with little ones. That's all coming up in the first ever Talking Lab Live. Talking Lab is an independent speech and language therapy service provider. We are a team of 2 therapists dedicated to improving lives by supporting communication. We provide assessment and support for families of children and young people aged 0 to 25, and you can enjoy sessions in the comfort of your own home, online, or at our clinic space in Waterlooville in Hampshire. We offer flexible appointment times and we promise to never put you on a waiting list. Check out our website at talking-lab.com for a full list of our services and prices. There's an option to submit an inquiry where we will call you back for a free, no obligation consultation. If you have communication concerns, we'd love to talk to you. So, time for our communication check-in. So how's it going for you? How has your week been? I feel like you've had a crazy busy week.
Yeah, my week has been absolutely mental. So I think I got to see you Monday last week, and I think that was kind of it, because obviously you had childcare commitments last week and you were very busy with family, because here at Talking Lab, what I absolutely love is first and foremost, family always comes first.
Yep.
And I think that's just such a fantastic motto to have. And then we also always together, which is why we saw each other on a Monday, was we did Zumba, where we start our week off right, we get that whole well-being in first, because that matters so much and it gives a really good start to the week. So we did that together. Our Zumba was actually a ballet session.
Oh yeah, it was so fun.
Which is crazy. Yeah, so we recorded that and I showed my partner the video. And he was like, "Oh, there's so many people that are really good at ballet. Not quite you."
That's so harsh.
Was not wrong. And then we caught up with Jane on Monday, because we are working together, well, you two in particular, to put your signing training course out there for everyone.
Yeah, watch this space.
So watch the space, big things coming. And then the rest of the week was just spent travelling here, there and everywhere. So I saw clients in the New Forest, I went to schools in West Sussex and Hampshire. What did I do? I had a meeting with my old lecturer from uni.
Nice.
Where we caught up on different case studies, which was really helpful. I had my supervision with Emily Price.
We love her.
We love her. Shout out to Emily at the autisticSLT.com. And then I had a big meeting where it's becoming more common at the minute, due to everything that's happening in the news with SEND children, that a lot of families are having to bring in educational solicitors to kind of these annual reviews to support the family in kind of getting their needs met. However, they are brutal.
Yes. Oh my god, the questions they were asking you.
They are brutal. I definitely think there is a huge reform as to how they want kind of these plans done. But it was really hard. And as an NQP, so a newly qualified practitioner, it was a learning curve for sure. Big reflective week. And then for the weekend, did I relax? No, of course I didn't. I don't know if I relaxed. We went to the spa and we spoke about the podcast.
Yeah, we did.
What's relaxing? No, I made all of my wedding invitations at the weekend as well.
Can confirm they are beautiful. Wax sealed with a specialist, what do you call it? Like a
seal?
A
stamp?
Yeah.
Maybe? I don't know. Yeah, a little. But yeah, they took a while, but it was such a relief that they're finished. Yeah. Really so exciting that it's getting closer.
Yeah, this year.
I know, crazy. But yeah, how was your week?
Yeah, so my week was, very child heavy because Matt was away doing his forest school training. Again, watch this space. And so I was looking after the kids a lot. Middle one, very shouty at me. And new baby is going through the 4-month sleep regression. So yeah, generally my kids are pretty good sleepers, and I know that a lot of parents out there will be listening being like, you don't know what it's like to not have sleep. So I am #blessed, but he is happy to sleep, but he wants to sleep with me. So he'll fall asleep and I'll very gently try and put him back in his cot, and he will be not happy about that.
Oh no.
Yeah, and he does this thing where he shakes his little fist like this and he goes,
hold me, mum.
How dare you? Like, he's incensed that I would put him in his cot. So then I hoik him out and then we both have a snuggle. So it's fine. It's not consistent sleep, it's broken sleep. So I'm feeling it a bit today.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Yes.
Understandable. But yeah, crazy weeks for both of us. This week's a little more settled. We can get the first podcast done, which we're very excited to do, and hope that it's obviously a great success and that everyone likes it.
Yeah.
And then one thing that we thought we'd be really important in all of our podcasts was to have a specific communication topic.
Yeah.
And I believe you've brought something this week that you wanted to talk about with me.
Absolutely. So this week I want to tell you all about Helen Keller.
Interesting.
Helen Keller, yeah. So Helen Keller is a person that I remember learning about. My mum told me about her when I was a little girl, so way before I became a speech therapist. And it's always just a story that really stuck in my mind. So I really wanted to share it with the world today. Have you heard of Helen Keller, and do you know anything about her?
I've heard the name. Oh God, testing my knowledge now. I know something happened and she ended up, was it multi-sensory disability, so blind and deaf at the same time?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's my limit, that's my knowledge.
Didn't you also say you've heard of her in a song?
Yeah, I heard of her in a song by 303, probably not the most appropriate line for poor Helen Keller, but yeah, and there was a film I think that came out, but I've never got around to watching it.
Okay, so I think that's basically what most people think of when they hear Helen Keller. They know that she was blind and deaf, and that's probably about it in the UK. In the US, so in America where she was from, I think she's a bit more of a household name. I think they learn about her in school, but I definitely never learned about her in the UK. So Helen Keller was born in 1880, so kind of like that Victorian time in America, somewhere in the deep south, and she was in a family that owned slaves. So yeah, I know. So you can see in the film that they would have a lot of slaves in there working for their family. And when she was 19 months old, she contracted an illness, and because it was Victorian times, they didn't know exactly what it was.
Yeah, of course. But
having looked back on it since, they think that it was probably meningitis.
Oh wow.
Yes, and so it caused her to be blind and deaf. So I'll come back to the fact that she was 19 months old at the time. But yeah, my friend Charlie, I think, got meningitis when he was about 3, and he's now deaf in one ear. Yeah, so it's definitely something that can cause that. To learn more about Helen Keller, because that's about the extent that I know about her, I watched a film that's based on her autobiography, and it's called The Miracle Worker.
Okay.
So it's a really old film, about 1960 something.
So black and white film?
Black and white film,
okay.
Yeah. And I think she was involved in the production of it. You can see a couple of stills of her working with the little girl who played her.
Okay.
And then they remade the film 70s, and the girl that played young Helen Keller then actually played their tutor, who
Oh, no way.
yeah, which is really nice.
Nice
Like, back in. Yeah. So basically, the family didn't know how to support her because, you know, what education was there back there and how to raise, you know, a deafblind child. So they really didn't really know what to do. She developed some of her own signs. So she would have a consistent sign that they would recognise that means like mummy, or a sign for some of the people in her lives. But basically, she was just left, you know, to kind of do her own thing. She was essentially, you know, a little bit feral. Where at dinner times they would have everyone around the dinner table with their own meals, and she would just walk around and eat the food off everyone's plate.
I think I saw a clip of this. So there was another film. I don't know if this is the same film you're talking about, and because it was a coloured film, not a black and white film, but it could have been remastered. And the clip I saw was her walking around the table stealing food, and then I think the tutor had brought her back to the table and was like, "No, you will sit here. You will eat with all of this etiquette and sophistication. You will communicate through this way."
Yeah, absolutely.
But even just watching that, it's crazy to think that that was something that happened, because I can imagine anyone doing that to that level in this day and age.
Yeah, it was really crazy. Yeah, her methods were highly questionable.
Yeah.
So basically the family were desperate, and they would write to, you know, specialists in the area, and then someone suggested that they got a private tutor in who was actually an alumnus of a school for visually impaired people.
That's
so
cool.
She had a visual impairment, grew up, graduated the school, and then they said, why don't you have this girl kind of move in with you and see if she can help to teach Helen. So that's what they did, and her name was Anne Sullivan.
Okay.
So she could see, but I think she'd like recovered her vision, and in the film she wears dark glasses all the time, and she says, you know, the sun hurts her eyes. And so she set about trying to teach Helen, and her method was to teach her using American Sign Language.
Okay.
So she would get her hands and she would spell things with her hands, and get Helen to feel her fingers and how she was making the different letters.
That's pretty interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so I read somewhere that Helen, because obviously when you can't see and you can't hear, your other senses become really heightened.
Yeah.
So her sense of touch, you know, in the film she's constantly like, she'll just quickly put her hand on someone's face and she'll know who that person is. Or she'll be right up close smelling them, and she'll know from their smell who is there. And
Which
then
is such a superpower in itself, to have that incredibly heightened sense to just be able to touch someone and be like, oh, that's mum.
Yeah,
oh, that's dad.
And not even like a real in-depth feel. It's literally just like plant her hand. Yeah.
Oh, it's you again. Sorry.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that she could tell who was approaching from the vibrations of their footsteps.
Wow.
Yeah. But then, having said that, you always know when I'm coming up to the office, don't you?
Yeah, that's true.
Because we've got some steps outside, and then what is it? You can tell when it's me.
Yeah, there's a certain, like, we've got we're in a shared office currently. We've got our shared co-worker Ali in the corner laughing at us. But I can also tell when he's coming up the stairs, because everyone sounds so differently as they're kind of approaching.
Oh, interesting. And what is it about it that you can, like, what quality is different?
I don't know. I think everyone's kind of got an independent way that they walk. It's like a different tempo. It's a different, like, heaviness, I guess, for like a different sound of walk.
So you just know, just like, I know that's Lucy.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. I mean that, and there's also usually dog steps and baby and everyone coming.
Stopping every step to heft this massive car seat up with me. Bring your baby to work day once a week. So she had these really, really heightened senses. And then in the film, Anne Sullivan comes in and she'll do something like she'll give Helen a doll, and then in the other house she'll sign it out, and Helen will be feeling what she's doing with her fingers. And
so is everything based on like alphabet signing?
In the film it was that, yeah. She wasn't doing anything apart from finger spelling.
Okay.
So she'd give her the doll, and then American Sign Language is very different to British Sign Language, obviously. They do it's a lot of like one-handed signs, whereas British Sign Language we often use two hands for different signs, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I've always questioned that, because there's been so many people that I've worked with that have had just a form of disability where fine motor movements are more difficult. Whereas I've always wondered, why is it not adapted to one-handed? Whereas the American Sign Language, I don't know much about it, but it makes so much more sense to kind of have that one-handed side.
I think you're right. So she'd be feeling the letters and she'd spell them out. and then she would she hit a point where she knew that she could do these hand, because she would often imitate hand movements. And so at this time, sorry, I should have said she was probably about, I can't remember, but she might have been about 7 or 8 years old, so it's not like a little child. So for those first 7 or 8 years... And this is
when the tutor first came in?
Exactly.
Okay, so she'd gone from like, would you say 19 months? Up to 7 of just kind of being relatively independent, floating about through life with...
just knowing who the people around her were, but not really having a consistent way to communicate with them. Just a few signs that she'd made up herself to request things like her mum and other people in her life.
And no wonder she was going around the dinner table, you know, just grappling what she wanted, if she didn't have a way of actually being like, oh, can you pass these, please?
Yes, exactly.
You know, I'd actually like a bit of that mashed potato.
So she did get to a stage where she would spell out the word doll and know that if she did that, she would be given the doll. But they could kind of tell that she wasn't really understanding that that was the name of the thing. It was just in her head almost like this as a password to be given the thing that she wanted. So the teacher could tell that she hadn't yet grasped the fact that that is the name of this thing. I'm spelling it out for you. It has a name. And in the film, you can really sense the frustration of the tutor. And she's like, you know, she'd fall over in the river or something, and she'd be so frustrated, and she'd, you know, Helen would drag her down, and then she'd spell it out in her hand, and she'd be like, oh, river, it has a name, it has a name, that's what the name is. But Helen just wasn't getting it. And so Anne was really, she came from an Irish background, so I imagine probably Irish Catholic, and she was furious at the family for kind of just letting Helen just roam about, you know, almost completely wild. And she was like, you wouldn't allow this with a child that wasn't disabled. And her family were like, well, you know, we make allowances for her. So Anne Sullivan was horrified that the family were just letting Helen Keller just roam about being, you know, essentially feral. And she said she is capable of so much more. She should be eating off her own plate. I don't want her eating off my plate. She doesn't need to eat with her hands like an animal. She needs to use cutlery. And the family were a little bit like, well, what's the big deal? Like, you know, she's a disabled child. This way we can have some peace and we can just eat and she's happy, rather than, you know, making her really unhappy. And Anne in the film, so obviously I don't know how true it was to real life, was just like, no, this is not good enough. Everyone get out. Leave her with me. And then there's just this very long, very uncomfortable to watch scene where they are literally beating each other.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so like Helen gets really cross and she slaps Anne, and Anne slaps her back, and they're like rolling about on the floor, wrestling, trying to get away from each other. Like food is going everywhere. It's insane. I
mean, Kathleen, that is not communication we promote.
It's not, that's not any kind of...
You know, poor Helen, she's what, 7?
Yeah.
She spent pretty much 6 years of her life doing her own thing, going through, you know, if I want that food, I'm going to have that food.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you what I want.
Yeah.
For someone to just come and not let me do that, but then I haven't got the communication kind of built with them, or a communication method with them for them even, oh my God, let me start that sentence again. For them to even then say to me that I can't do that.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way, or did they just finger spell out no, or, you know?
So what they would do is they would bring her hand to, can I borrow your hand?
Yeah.
They bring her hand to their head, and they would shake their head or nod their head.
Oh, okay.
And she understood that would mean yes or no. So she should have that yes-no understanding.
Interesting.
And she had an understanding of like emotions as well, because they would take her hand and put that on their face and when their eyes, if they were crying and things like that. And that was their way of sharing their emotions. So they built up some like basic level of communication between them.
I mean, that in itself is impressive.
Yeah. I would not know where to start. It's so tricky, isn't it? So they did the best they could with what they knew and what they had. But yeah, Anne Sullivan was having none of it. She was like, she's going to sit at the table. She's going to use cutlery. You know, she's going to be like a 7-year-old should. So in the film, she takes her off to like a cabin. She's like, put Helen in the carriage, drive her around so she's really disoriented and doesn't know where she is, and then drop her in this cabin, which is at the end of their rounds. It is, yeah, it was pretty horrific. Yeah, not gonna lie, very questionable teaching methods. And at this point, they'd had a massive fight, and so Helen really hated Anne. Did not want to talk to her at all. Yeah. So as soon as she could feel that she was in somewhere different, and then she could feel that it was Anne, and she was, you know, really upset, really wanted to get out. the family were finding it really hard, and they were like, please let her come back home, and Anne was like, no, let me
Could you
teach
imagine
her.
if that was this day and age and we were promoting our choices are a really great way of communication, but just spin them in like 20 circles first, so they're really dizzy, they're not too sure where they are, then we'll try and show it to them, but then they can't fully see because they're disorientated. Like, what?
I know, absolutely crazy. But yeah, so she kept her in this cabin, and eventually she got her to, you know, I think Anne did feel bad for the fight and for how they, you know, Helen
And for the trauma.
Yeah, massive trauma.
I still don't understand the purpose of why she needs to be disorientated if you're going to keep her pretty much locked in a cabin.
I guess just so that she could, if she knew how close she was to home, she probably would have just hopped out the window and legged it back home. So I think she needed to...
I mean, I don't blame her.
Yeah, I think she was like, she would say, you know, Helen needs to be dependent on me. I need to be the one to teach her. And so she wanted her to really feel like Anne is the only thing that's keeping me safe from danger. In a way, like, I'm going to have to...
In a way that I am the danger.
Yeah, yes. So she's both the threat and the solution. It was pretty wild. But anyway, Helen did forgive her, and like they became great friends up until she died and everything.
Which I think is very big of Helen.
It is big of Helen
to forgive that.
But yeah, I mean, even though Anne's methods were not at all okay, the outcomes that she got were, she did get Helen to communicate.
Okay.
So in this time that they had in the cabin, she kind of, it was all very like compliance based. So she got her to get used to dressing herself, sitting down, using cutlery, all of these weird things that were obviously very important to Victorians.
Mm-hmm.
And the family were really thrilled. They were like, wow, you know, she can sit at a table, she can use cutlery, she can dress herself, she's more independent. But Anne was still really frustrated, and she was like, it's not good enough. She still doesn't understand that the things that I'm spelling out to her are the names of the things in her world. And her parents were a bit like, well, we don't care. We think this is great that she, you know, can sit and look more like part of the family.
Yeah, but she still hasn't got a purpose.
No,
she still
exactly.
can't communicate that. It's almost like a glorified dress-up doll.
Yeah, it's
she's
weird.
dressed well, she's sat there, she's being quiet.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Could you ask her what she wants?
No, she had no way of expressing her own opinion on things. And now she was even more like, you know, just compliance-based, which it's not what we're all about at all. So then they returned her to the family, and they were all sat around having a meal together. And then Helen knew that she was back with her family, so she was happy with that. And then she was a little bit like, well, you know, I don't have to stick to the rules now because, you know, I'm back in my safe space and I can do what I want. So she got up to her old tricks, you know, was starting roaming around the table, and then that really annoyed Anne, and she was like, got her and dragged her back to her seat and was like, just because we're out of the cabin, you know, you still have to sit down and behave, you know.
That's a word.
Yeah, and then, hello, Mr. Trunky. And then Helen... tipped a big jug of water over, and Anne was furious, and she dragged Helen by the wrist, and the family were like, oh, where are you taking her? Like, this is our homecoming meal, like, we're all supposed to be enjoying it together. And she was like, no, we're going out to the well in the garden, and she'll fill up that water, you know, she spilt it so she can fill it up. So she drags her out, and she was really cross with her, and Helen was really fighting her off. And she pumped, you know, spun these big wells with the handle, and you pump it and the water comes out. And she put her hand under the water, and with her other hand she was spelling out water. You know, she was still really cross, but she was like, water, it has a name. And then there's this like moment, and this is the moment that Helen, you know, remembers so clearly. And that was the moment when it clicked for her, that she was like, I'm feeling the water on my hand, and I'm being spelled out. And the thing that it's spelling out is the name of what's in my hand, and that's the water. And she actually says the word water. So her mum says that at the beginning of the film we learn that because obviously she was 19 months when she lost her sight and her hearing, and her mum said, you know, she's such a clever child. I remember at 6 months old she could say the word water. She would say it like this, war, but she knew that was water. And then I don't know whether it happened like that, but in the film, when she's older and she has that breakthrough moment of, I understand now, this is the name of it, and she says, wah, wah, and then Anne realises she gets it, she actually understands, this is the name of the thing. And then that's when it all changes for Helen, and then she's taking Anne's hand, and she drags her around, and she puts her hand on something, and she gives her the other hand and says, what is it? Tell me what this is called. And Anne's there spelling everything out into her hand, and she's just going all around, wants to know the name of everything. And she's so clever, and she picks it up really, really quickly. And then at the end of the film, it's a really nice moment, and they have a big cuddle, and, you know, Anne spells out I love Helen on Helen's hand, and Helen gives her a big hug, and you can just sense it, like they've been through this massive journey, but she's so grateful to Anne that now she understands, and now she has this basis to communicate.
So you started saying obviously the film's based on an autobiography. So did Helen get to a point where she could kind of, I mean, solely produce or co-produce or?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that is not even covered in the film. That's the end of the film. But then through my further reading about Helen, so then she goes on to learn how to write, learn how to read, presumably with Braille.
I don't know, because if she's kind of had some of her sight come back and it's more just of the light sensitivity, if she was able to kind of have those adapted glasses for as good as they were at the time, she may still have been able to actually read.
I'm pretty sure she was completely blind. I'm pretty sure she couldn't see anything. So I assume that she read with Braille, but she definitely learned how to write. And if you go online, you can see some examples of her writing. She goes on to university, and she goes to a school for I don't know whether it's deaf and blind or just visually impaired people. Then goes on to university and becomes the first deaf blind person to get a Bachelor of Arts.
Wow.
Yeah. And she goes on to learn how to talk as well. And the way that she learns how to talk is through something called the Tadoma method, which is where she feels how people are producing the sound. So she puts her fingers on their like voice boxes and on their lips, and then she can feel what kind of a sound that she's making and map it out to the words. Obviously she can read the word, feel how they're making the sounds, and then produce those sounds. So as speech and language therapist, I can kind of understand that.
Fascinating,
isn't it? But if you think about how we're taught all the different sounds, you know, we should technically, although we don't practice our VPN that often, but we should technically know that if a sound is voiced, plosive, and, you know, I can't even think what it is. It's like voiced, voice, place, manner, voice, bilabial, plosive, then that's, you know, an M and things like that. So we should be able, no, not an M.
B.
Okay, thanks. Not been at uni for a while. So yeah, we should be able to figure out that that's the kind of sound that's being made, and that's how she would do it. So again, if you go on Wikipedia, you can hear
recording in progress.
Thank you. You can hear an example of her talking, and she talks clearly. You know, she talks quite slowly. You know, you wouldn't necessarily listen and think, oh, that's a deaf person talking, but it is amazing. And you know, she had a lot of speech therapy so that she would become clearer to other people.
As in professional speech therapy, or are they classing the original tutor that kind of worked on all those areas of communication as speech therapy?
No, she had professional speech therapy.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was for the what was the name of the
Tadoma method.
The Tadoma method.
Yes, I think the Tadoma method was probably how she learned how to talk, and then the speech therapy would help her refine those skills, so that she would sound a lot clearer to other people. And her and Anne, you know, remained really good friends until Anne died. I think they moved around the country. She would lecture. I think she was a big advocate for, you know, disability rights, things like that. I think she was also really into eugenics.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah, a little bit out there, because I guess she came from like the deep south, whereas, you know, slavery was very the norm and things like that, and believed in, you know, genetic hierarchies and things like that. So not so great, but you know,
not
back
so
in the
great.
day was probably one of the was probably more acceptable. And then she died in 1968, and that's the story of.
That's still a pretty full life in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Like, what would she have been? What do you say, from 1880 to 1968? Was that 88 years?
88 years old, yeah.
Is that right, maths?
Yeah, I think so.
We joke all the time. You meet a speech therapist who's good at maths, they're not a good speech therapist.
No, you cannot be good at maths if you're a speech therapist.
But yeah, 88 years old, like, that's still pretty full life.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing.
And I think, as a speech and language therapist, I think two things really strike me about her story. One is that because she was hearing and could see until she was 19 months, I think that her outcome would be very different to someone who was maybe deafblind from birth. because, well, from an outside perspective, it's like, oh, well, she's 19 months old, she's way off kind of, you know, really developing language. We know how much language development goes on in those first 19 months. So even though she wasn't consciously aware of, you know, words and their meanings, her understanding would have reached a point by there, and especially if she was starting to say words like water, that actually it was more of like an awakening of those language centres that she'd already been developing. Whereas comparing it, I think someone who was deafblind from birth would find it a lot harder and maybe wouldn't have reached such a proficient language level where she could...
No, it's very interesting, and I've personally not come across somebody that is deafblind, both personally and professionally, to kind of know where their language level would be. Obviously it's individualised, it's not just a whole community of deafblind people have the same level of language, of course, but no, I've never come across anyone, so it would be interesting if anybody has, you know, if they were happy to share with us that that's something that they had seen.
And then the other thing was, as you mentioned before, the fact that ASL is one-handed. I think that really helped, because she was always able to have the object in her other hand and be spelling it out with her dominant hand or the other way around.
Because I feel that if you had to do one-handed, you wouldn't be able to map it as quicker, because you'd be constantly bouncing between the two. Like, for example, this leaf, you'd be holding and then signing, and I don't think I'd make those pathway connections.
No,
I'd probably just be like, why is this like a sensory break in between? Do you just want me to feel something very random? Or as you said, it was for reward. Do I need to sign this and then I get that for that item? I suppose that's why we always say it's so important to kind of map things so close together. To kind of build on those pathways.
Timing is really important.
Absolutely.
So maybe the Americans have got it right and we've got it wrong. We should all switch to ASL.
I mean, I know no ASL at all.
No, from the film I think I picked up sticking one finger up like that as a D, the L sign as an L.
Which makes sense.
I said that's an R. I quite liked that for R. Cross your fingers, like it looks like a little R. So little bits that I picked up. But that's the story of Helen Keller. What do you think?
I think that's fascinating.
Isn't it?
I feel that she has been very misjudged, because I feel that all the small bits of information I knew previously about her focused probably a lot more on her disability than who she was as a person. And, you know, she achieved so much and you don't hear about these achievements. And I think that's such a shame, because that was a lovely story to share. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Sharing.
So we'll put a link to the film. So the film is The Miracle Worker. That's the original film. And then I want to say Disney did the remake.
Oh, really?
In the 70s. Yeah, I'll look into that. But we'll put that in the show notes if you want to check it out. I recommend. I didn't manage to find it for free, so I had to pay for it on Amazon Prime. But I'm really glad that I watched it, so would recommend.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if the coloured version clips I saw was a remake, because certain parts that you spoke about, I was like, oh, I've seen like a little clip of this, so I do wonder if that's kind of been remastered. But we'll have a look, and if we find it, we'll link that as well.
Yes, awesome.
That moves us on nicely to our next segment, which we want to introduce as a Q&A. So we were going to put on our website or on Spotify or whichever a lovely little box of Q&A, whereas if you as the viewers had any communication questions, anything to do with speech and language, or just had any general thoughts that you wanted to put across to us, we'd love to hear them, and we'd love to take that time to kind of respond to that kind of question that's put forward, as we know, particularly at the minute, there is a massive need for speech and language therapy within the UK, and there isn't enough kind of resources available at the moment that a lot of families can access. So even if there's just one question that's been nibbling away that you think we can answer, then please contact us, and we'll pop that Q&A on our website, which is talking-lab.com, with our little logos.
Look for the doggy.
But yeah, and then if you've got anything else on there, or if you wanted to send us an inquiry or just have a chat, all of our details are on the website, where you'll find everything all in that one nice little place.
Yeah, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We want this podcast to be helpful for people who are interested in communication. We want to finish off every episode with Talking Lab Loves, which is a page that we have on our website where we signpost people to services, products, things that we think are amazing. They won't always be communication based, but today's one is, because this episode was all about introducing the idea of signing as a form of communication. We use signing all the time. As speech and language therapists, we absolutely love to sign. And one of our favourite services is Little Bear Baby Signing, which is run by our friend Jane, who we're working on a signing course at the moment with. Yep. So she does really fun, interactive, music-based classes in the Hampshire area for parents and children aged 0 to 2 years. So you can check out her website at littlebearbabysigning.com, and if you can, get along to a class, or she does online classes as well. It's just a really fun way to learn the signs. I've taken all 3 of my children along to her classes, and it's a great way for me to keep up my signing knowledge, because she just has a really nice way of teaching the signs, doesn't she, and getting them sticking in mind.
Yeah, and I always remember the story of you saying about one of the girls was in the car and was kind of pointing to something and you couldn't quite see, and was it that they signed Fox? She
signed Fox, yeah.
Yeah, and without that signing, you would have had a clue that that's kind of the object that she wanted.
Absolutely.
And kind of how important that was.
Yeah, big pile of cuddly toys. She'd seen the fox on the way into the car, and I was strapping her in, and she was desperately trying to get this fox. Signed Fox to me, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, here you are. So yeah, more sign, less wine. That's what they say at Little Bear Baby Sign.
More sign, less wine.
So yeah, we love them. We love Little Bear Baby Sign. Definitely check them out. And I guess all that's left to say is thank you so much for listening and watching. And we will see you in a fortnight's time for the next episode.
Episode 2.
Episode 2. Thanks for joining us. Bye.